Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Tuesday, January 27, 2026. President Donald Trump calls for a very honorable and honest investigation of the shooting death in Minneapolis of Alex Pretti by Border Patrol agents. And the president defends Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem, while Congressional Democrats are calling for her impeachment. Senate returns to session just a couple of days before the deadline to pass a Homeland Security spending bill to prevent a partial government shutdown, with Democrats demanding reforms to Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, as the price for their votes. President Trump travels to suburban Des Moines, Iowa, to talk about the economy and affordability. Maryland Governor Wes Moore testifies before a Maryland House committee about congressional redistricting that could lead to the only U.S. House seat in the state held by a Republican flipping to Democratic control in 2026. National Transportation Safety Board holds its final hearing on the mid-air collision last year between an American Airlines regional jet and an Army helicopter near Reagan National Airport. The Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney denies he walked back criticism of President Trump's foreign policy in a phone call with the president this week. The Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists moves its symbolic doomsday clock to the closest it has ever been to midnight, and the United Nations Secretary General marks International Holocaust Remembrance Day. News Nation reporting from Minneapolis, Border Patrol's Gregory Bovino left the city Tuesday morning and will return to his sector post in California, sources told News Nation. White House Border Czar Tom Homan is taking the helm, and one of his first moves was to meet with Governor Tim Walz. Walz's office told News Nation Governor Walz met with Tom Homan this morning and reiterated Minnesota's priorities: impartial investigations into the Minneapolis shootings involving federal agents, a swift, significant reduction in the number of federal forces in Minnesota, and an end to the campaign of retribution against Minnesota. News Nation article says that Homan will report directly to President Donald Trump on the latest from Minneapolis, which has been the site of daily protests and calls for federal investigations after the shooting deaths of Renee Macklin-Good and Alex Pretti by federal immigration agents. Bovino and Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem have placed blame on Good, Pretti, and the state's Democrats for the shootings, labeling both victims as domestic terrorists, emboldened by the party's immigration protests. Again, reporting from News Nation. Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Fry, a Democrat, later writing on X, "Today, Chief O'Hara and I met with Border Czar Tom Homan and had a productive conversation. I reiterated that my main ask is for Operation Metro Surge to end as quickly as possible. Public safety works best when it's built on community trust, not tactics that create fear or division." President Trump was asked as he left the White House this morning about whether the Alex Pretti shooting was justified and what he would say to the Pretti family.
Do you believe that Alex Pretti's death was justified?
Well, you know, we're doing a big investigation. I want to see the investigation. I'm going to be watching over it. I want a very honorable and honest investigation. I have to see it myself. Well, I'm looking at that whole situation. I love everybody. I love all of our people. I love his family. And it's a very sad situation.
President Trump with reporters outside the White House, a little noisy as the helicopter was revving up in the background. He also said Alex Pretti should not have carried a firearm, telling the reporters, "You can't have guns, you can't walk in with guns." Former President Joe Biden putting out a statement today: "What has unfolded in Minneapolis this past month betrays our most basic values as Americans. We are not a nation that guns down our citizens in the street. We are not a nation that allows our citizens to be brutalized for exercising their constitutional rights. We are not a nation that tramples the Fourth Amendment and tolerates our neighbors being terrorized." The other living former Democratic presidents, Bill Clinton and Barack Obama, put out similar statements over the past weekend. CNN writes that President Donald Trump met for nearly 2 hours with Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem and her senior advisor, Corey Lewandowski, in the Oval Office on Monday evening. Two sources familiar with the meeting told CNN after Noem had asked to speak with Trump in person. And today outside the White House, the president was asked if Secretary Noem would be leaving the cabinet. The president answered no. And a bit later, he was asked again about what kind of job she's doing.
I am, yeah. I think she's doing a very good job. The border is totally secure. You know, you forget. We had a border that I inherited where millions of people were coming through. Now we have a border where no one is coming through. They come into our country only legally. So you have to remember those things. You know, people forget as soon as you accomplish something, it goes into history, and nobody ever wants to talk about it. We had a border that caused all of this problem. Biden caused, and the Democrats caused this problem. They allowed tens of millions of people to come in. Many of them were murderers. Many were drug dealers, drug addicts, people from mental institutions. They allowed these people to violate our country, to come into our country. And that's what we're talking about. So if you remember, we had a horrible border, the worst border we've ever had, ever in history. People were flowing through by, we think, 25 million people, not to mention drugs and everything else. And that border is absolutely closed.
President Donald Trump with reporters outside the White House. He was flying off to Iowa to give a speech on the economy. His first stop was a restaurant in Urbandale. In addition to taking questions about the economy, he was also asked about what's happening in Minnesota.
Agree with the assessment from some of your own officials that Alex Pretti is a domestic terrorist or an assassin?
Well, I haven't heard that, but certainly he shouldn't have been carrying a gun. But hey, look, bottom line, everybody in this room, we view that as a very unfortunate incident, okay? Everyone, unless you're a stupid person, very, very unfortunate incident. I don't like that he had a gun. I don't like that he had 2 fully loaded magazines. That's a lot of bad stuff. And despite that, I say that's a very unfortunate.
What do you think of some Republicans saying
President Donald Trump speaking to reporters at a restaurant in Iowa. Senator John Fetterman, Democrat of Pennsylvania, writing on X, President Donald Trump, I make a direct appeal to immediately fire Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem. Americans have died. She is betraying DHS's core mission and trashing your border security legacy. Do not make the mistake President Biden made for not firing a grossly incompetent DHS secretary. That post from Senator John Fetterman. The House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, Democrat from New York, also called for Secretary Noem to be fired and said if she's not, House Democrats will move to impeach her. Congressman Jeffries was interviewed today on MS Now.
Kristi Noem is a despicable, corrupt, pathological liar. We've seen her slander not just one, but 2 American citizens, patriotic Americans who were killed without justification on the streets of Minneapolis in the last few weeks. She's deeply unqualified. She never should have been confirmed to begin with by Senate Republicans, and House Democrats have called for her to be fired immediately. And in the event that she is not terminated, we are prepared to initiate impeachment proceedings against her in the House of Representatives.
Well, the president has given no indication that he's ready to fire her or even thinking about it. And you, as I don't need to tell you, are in the minority. So how do you do that? I mean, what can you do? Have you spoken to the speaker? Do you have any sense that there are Republicans who would stand by you in an impeachment process?
We have to build a case so that we can convince a handful of Republicans, as we have done on other issues, that the time is now to hold the Department of Homeland Security accountable for their behavior. They are conducting themselves like a paramilitary organization, as opposed to protecting the health, the safety, and the well-being of the American people. They are violently targeting American citizens and law-abiding immigrant families, and it's unacceptable, it's unconscionable, and it's un-American. We're prepared to hold hearings, as we've done in other instances, and use every tool available to make sure that Kristi Noem is held accountable. But even more importantly, of course, we support the effort by Leader Chuck Schumer and Senate Democrats to force common sense changes to the Department of Homeland Security so that these law enforcement agencies are behaving like every other law enforcement agency in the country, as opposed to like a paramilitary organization, which is what the American people have seen on the streets of Minneapolis.
House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, Democrat from New York, today on MS Now. The House not in session today, but the Senate is. Semaphore writing that Senate Republicans plan to vote on a government funding package as soon as Thursday, shrugging off Democrats' vows to filibuster the legislation unless DHS funding is removed and amended after 2 fatal Minnesota shootings. Avoiding a January 31st shutdown might come down to whether the White House and Democrats agree on changes to immigration enforcement. That was from Semaphore. The Senate Majority Leader John Thune, Republican from South Dakota, spoke on the Senate floor about government funding.
Mr. President, before I begin, I want to take a moment to talk about the situation in Minnesota. The death of Alex Pretti was a tragedy, and there should be a full and impartial investigation into the shooting. I'm glad that the President is sending Tom Homan to Minnesota, and I hope that his arrival will help restore order to the situation. I also hope that recent tragedies have inspired some soul-searching among those who have participated in or encouraged abuse toward ICE officers and other law enforcement officers. It is deeply disturbing that we have had public officials essentially encouraging harassment of officers simply trying to do their duty. Mr. President, funding for a substantial portion of the government runs out this week, and we are on the clock to pass the remaining fiscal year 2026 appropriations bills. Productive talks are ongoing, and I urge my Democrat colleagues to continue their engagement and find a path forward that will avoid a needless shutdown and not jeopardize full funding for key agencies like FEMA and the Coast Guard. We need to fund these and other essential agencies and finish our 2026 appropriations work now.
Senate Majority Leader John Thune, Republican from South Dakota, on the Senate floor. The Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, also spoke about the fiscal year 2026 spending bills, especially the Homeland Security Department and ICE funding.
Black ICE SUVs roaming the streets and agents barging into homes without warrants. ICE encircling schools with riot gear and using kids as bait, and terrorizing our communities to the point that people are afraid to go to work, to church, shop for groceries. This madness, this terror must stop. The American people, Democrat, Republican, Independent, demand that the chaos and lawlessness of ICE be severely reined in. This week, the Senate will step into the breach. In a few days, the Senate will consider a package of 6 funding bills sent to us recently by the House, and 5 of those bills are ready to go and should quickly pass. I'll say more about that in a moment. But in the wake of ICE's abuses and the administration's recklessness, the Senate must not pass the DHS budget as currently written and must be reworked to rein in and overhaul ICE to ensure the public's safety. The fix should come from Congress. The public can't trust the administration to do the right thing on its own, and Republicans and Democrats must work together to make that happen. In the meantime, I will vote no on any legislation that funds ICE until it is reined in and overhauled, and Senate Democrats are overwhelmingly united on this issue. ICE should meet the same basic standards of accountability and due process that any law enforcement agency is asked to meet. Now, separately, to finish the appropriations process, Leader Thune should split the funding bills and move forward with the 5 that already have broad support from both parties. If Leader Thune agrees to split the bills, just as Speaker Johnson split them in the House, and puts the 5 on the floor, I'm confident they will sail through the chamber, and we will have funded 96% of the federal government. But if Leader Thune insists on holding a vote on DHS legislation that he knows will not pass, then he will guarantee yet another unnecessary government shutdown this Friday, and the shutdown will be on Leader Thune's shoulders.
Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, on the Senate floor. Fox News writing that President Donald Trump's approval ratings on tackling illegal immigration dropped to a new low as a majority of Americans say the crackdown by federal agents has gone too far, according to a new national poll. The survey by Reuters Ipsos was conducted Friday through Sunday, both before and after federal immigration agents fatally shot a second U.S. citizen who was protesting enforcement operations in Minneapolis, Minnesota. 39% of adults nationwide questioned in the poll say they approved of the job the president is doing on immigration, while 53% disapproved. That was from Fox News. First Lady Melania Trump also asked today during a Fox News Channel interview about what's happening in Minneapolis.
We need to unify. I'm calling for unity. I know my husband, the president, had a great call yesterday with the governor and the mayor, and they're working together to make it peaceful and without riots. I'm against the violence, so if we protest in peace. And we need to unify in these times. Mm-hmm.
First Lady Melania Trump today on Fox News. It was the start of an interview that was mostly about the new documentary, Melania, that's coming out in theaters about her return to the White House. This is Washington Today. President Trump traveling to Iowa today, the suburbs of Des Moines, talking about the economy and affordability, political rights. The president's Tuesday swing through the Des Moines suburbs, where he will visit a local business, give a speech on the economy, and meet with lawmakers, is the latest example of the White House deploying Trump to energize the GOP in districts he carried. It reflects a bet that his physical presence, more than any specific policy message, will boost turnout among voters who showed up for him in 2024 but are less likely to vote in a midterm election where he's not on the ballot. That was from Politico. Here is the president taking reporters' questions at a restaurant in Urbandale, Iowa.
We have $18 trillion coming in, building plants, building auto factories, building AI factories. Like no other country in the world has done what we've done in the last year. And I think it's the most successful first-term president. There's never been a year like this in the history of the country. And he's been with me from the beginning, this guy. Make sure, take good care of him. He's been with me. So I'm going around, and I'm going around because hopefully we win the midterms. And it's very scary because, like, it's 2 out of 50 years or something like that.
That's right.
For some reason, when a president wins, Republican or Democrat, even if they're a good president, and hopefully I'm a great president, based on the first year I'm a great president. And we had a great first term, too. People don't really, we rebuilt our military. We had phenomenal financial numbers, but I think this term's blowing away really every term. But traditionally, when a president gets elected, out of, I think, 50 years, they've had 2 that won. I don't understand it.
You're going to be the next.
They've had 2, so we have to, and one was by unusual circumstance. So there's something psychological. If you win the president, whether you're Republican or Democrat, with that being said, the polls look very good. Everything looks very good. And you have great congressmen here, congressmen and women here, and we love Iowa. We love Iowa. And I think didn't I just give the farmers $12 billion, right?
$66 billion in total.
Well, I gave total 66.
That's right.
But just recently we gave the farmers $12 billion because they were treated unfairly by foreign countries. I said, how much? They said $12 billion. I said, they got it. You know where I got it? Tariffs. I got it from the tariffs. Without the tariffs. And again, most of these, we right now have more factories and plants being built in our country than we've ever had before. That came in because they're coming because they don't want to pay the tariffs. So I said, if you build here, you don't have to pay tariffs. So it's great.
President Donald Trump in a restaurant in Urbandale, Iowa, before giving a speech at nearby Clive, Iowa, on the economy. Wall Street today, the Dow down 408, NASDAQ up 215, S&P up 28. Cleanup from the weekend snowstorm continues in many states. Federal government closed for a second day in a row here in the Washington, D.C. area. More than a dozen states from New Mexico to Connecticut got more than a foot of snow. And now the bitter cold temperatures in many places means it is not going to melt for at least a week. New York City Mayor Zohran Mamdani, a Democrat, held a news conference today giving an update on response to the cold weather.
Before we begin, I wanted to first give an update on the life-threatening cold that this city has been enduring for days. Yesterday, I shared that the city has placed 170 homeless New Yorkers off the streets and into transitional housing like shelters, safe havens, and stabilized beds. I can also share today that since January 19th, the city has made nearly 500 of those placements. But at least 10 New Yorkers have tragically lost their lives after being found outdoors. We don't yet know whether every case will be ruled hypothermia, but we need every New Yorker to be on alert, looking out for their neighbors. The city remains in code blue, which means that we are intensifying outreach, that we are conducting round-the-clock checks, and have loosened traditional shelter intake procedures to accommodate as many New Yorkers as possible. 311 calls are being rerouted to 911, so help gets there faster. And we are immensely grateful for the 911 operators who serve as the connective tissue of our emergency operations. But Code Blue alone is not enough in a cold this severe, this rare. To remind New Yorkers, this is the coldest weather conditions that we have experienced in this city for 8 years. And that is why we are executing new additional emergency protocol to enhance our efforts. We are sending out requests to send staff out every few hours to canvass nearby blocks and engage anyone who needs assistance. This would be from our shelter partners, as well as asking faith-based organizations to assist in some of those outreach efforts. We are also partnering with advocates and volunteers like Street Homeless Advocacy Project, SHAP, to conduct extra shifts this week in high-need areas. We have also asked hospitals to limit overnight discharges to ensure that people who have nowhere to go are kept indoors. We have opened up 10 new warming shelters since Friday. Last night, we opened an additional 7 H&H health centers across all 5 boroughs. Additionally, above the existing warming buses that we have already put into operation, we have added 10 new warming buses at key locations across the city. We are also expanding overnight outreach from city workers with paid overtime so that our city can continue to get homeless New Yorkers inside. And we are expanding the hours of 8 SHOW vans to make sure we can bring people indoors during late and early hours, including using their vans for transport and for temporary shelter. We are working with the state, finally, to redirect mental health teams to focus on life-saving street and subway outreach. And for any additional information on the location of these new warming centers or on the resources that I have mentioned, please do call 311.
New York City Mayor Zohran Mamdani, a Democrat, at a news conference today in New York City. Reuters writing the Federal Aviation Administration did not act on a recommendation to move helicopter traffic away from Reagan Washington National Airport after a 2013 near-miss incident, the National Transportation Safety Board said on Tuesday during a hearing about a fatal crash last year. NTSB board members said at the hearing looking into the January 2025 collision between an American Airlines regional jet and an Army Black Hawk helicopter near Reagan, which killed 67 people, was the result of a multitude of errors and systemic issues across multiple organizations. That was from Reuters. NTSB Chair Jennifer Homendy spoke to reporters after today's hearing.
Chris Van Cleve from CBS News. There's very clear frustration from the board, it sounds like, when it comes to the FAA's role in all of this. Should the FAA have known there was a problem? Should something have been done?
The question is, should the FAA have known there was a problem, and should something have been done? Absolutely. The data was there. The data was in their own systems. It was the NTSB working with them to determine that there were 15,214 close proximity events, 85 of which were serious, over a number of years. That's just the data. Why collect data if you're not going to analyze it? Then they were supposed to conduct annual reviews of helicopter routes to consider, are they still safe? Is there utility to keeping them? Should they change? We couldn't find any evidence of annual reviews, nor could FAA tell us who did them. That is astounding to me. It's one, I believe, failure after another. But we can talk about the pilots, we can talk about air traffic controllers, we can talk about traffic. What we need to really talk about is a tower and tower personnel who were repeatedly saying, we have a safety problem here. We have a hot spot at the end of runway 33 and we need to do something about it. We have helicopter routes where we have unsafe practices right now. We need to do something. How many times do tower personnel, who, by the way, put their own helicopter working group together and kept submitting one recommendation after another? We need help, we need help, we need help. Apparently falling on deaf ears. So I will also get she sounds angry. We should be angry. Because for years, no one listened. This was preventable. This was 100% preventable. Frankly, having a helicopter route crossing runway 33 with only 75 feet that means 75 feet of vertical separation. What that means is 75 feet at best separating a helicopter and civilian aircraft. Nowhere in the airspace is that okay. Nowhere. This shouldn't have existed.
National Transportation Safety Board Chair Jennifer Homendy speaking to reporters after today's hearing, which comes 2 days before the anniversary of the fatal mid-air collision between the Army helicopter and regional jet near Reagan Airport. Washington Today continues in a moment.
Democracy. It isn't just an idea, it's a process shaped by leaders elected to the highest offices and entrusted to a select few with guarding its basic principles. It's where debates unfold, decisions are made, and the nation's course is charted. Democracy in real time. This is your government at work. This is C-SPAN, giving you your democracy unfiltered.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app and wherever you find your podcasts. A few more headlines from the Hill. District of Columbia Delegate Eleanor Holmes Norton, a Democrat, 88 years old, announced Tuesday that she's retiring after her current term in Congress, just days after her campaign filed a termination report without explanation. Norton said in a statement posted on social media, "The privilege of public service is inseparable from the responsibility to recognize when it's time to lift up the next generation of leaders. For D.C., that time has come. With pride in all we have accomplished together, with the deepest gratitude to the people of D.C., and with the great confidence in the next generation, I announced today that I will retire at the end of this term." Norton has been the district's non-voting congressional delegate since 1991. And from Roll Call, Florida Congressman Vern Buchanan, a longtime member of the Ways and Means Committee, announced Tuesday that he will not seek re-election this year after nearly 2 decades in Congress. He put out a statement, "I came to Congress to solve problems, to fight for working families, and to help ensure this country remains a place where opportunity is available to everyone willing to work for it. After 20 years of service, I believe it's the right time to pass the torch and begin a new chapter in my life." The Roll Call article says that Buchanan's decision will leave open a safe Republican seat in Southwest Florida, just north of Sarasota. CBS News writing that Maryland Governor Wes Moore will testify in support of congressional redistricting during a House Rules Executive Nominations Committee hearing on Tuesday. The governor expected to express his support for House Bill 488. Legislation would also add a ballot question that asked voters if the proposed congressional maps should also be used for the 2028 and 2030 elections before being updated after the 2030 U.S. Census. Tuesday's hearing will be followed by a vote. Hundreds of people signed up to testify, according to the Baltimore Banner. That was from CBS News. The purpose of the new map is to turn the 7-1 Democratic advantage in the state in U.S. House seats to an 8-0. by carving up the 1st congressional district currently held by Freedom Caucus Chair Andy Harris, a Republican. Here is Governor Wes Moore.
I'm proud to be here because from day one, I have been very clear that if there was a national conversation happening right now about fair maps across this country, then Maryland would be a part of that conversation. That Donald Trump and J.D. Vance have asked states to re-examine their maps. Yet they've asked states to do it in an unthoughtful way, and to do it in a way where it was not about hearing the voices of the people, but it was actually about suppressing the voices of the people. But in Maryland, we decided not to do that, because in Maryland, we will hear the will of the people. And that's why on November 4th, I announced the reconstitution of the Governor's Redistricting Advisory Commission. And for the past 2 months, any Marylander from any region, from any background, from any political perspective could testify and make their voices heard. The commission's recommendation was shaped by public submissions. It was shaped by public hearings. It was shaped by public feedback. And that is how our democracy is supposed to work. To create more competition and accountability, and not less. To elect candidates of Marylanders' choosings. To be more accurate and have an accurate reflection of how Marylanders live. And to ensure that their voices and concerns are fairly and fully represented in Congress. It is imperative that Maryland do its part to ensure that Congress is able to function as a meaningful check on executive overreach. And now is the time for the General Assembly to do what Marylanders expect: debate the map, improve it if necessary, and then take the vote. Because make no mistake, what the President of the United States is doing right now is political redlining. And it is not lost to me that I am the only black governor in this country, and only the 3rd elected black governor in the history of this nation. And Donald Trump and J.D. Vance and their allies in the states that he suggested are doing everything in their power to silence the voices and trying to eliminate black leadership, elected leadership, all over this country. So no, I will not sit quiet. And the audacity of those who are telling me to do so shows that they have no understanding of the journey of so many who came before us.
Maryland Governor Wes Moore, a Democrat, at today's House of Delegates Rules and Executive Nominations Committee hearing in Annapolis. Sitting beside the governor was State Delegate C.T. Wilson, a Democrat, sponsor of the redistricting bill, and he got these questions from Republican Delegate Jason Buckle.
These maps are clearly driven for a purely partisan purpose. No one talked about uniting communities of interest. No one talked about fairness. I think the word was used. Everyone talked about Donald Trump. Everyone talked about the House of Representatives. Did the commission utilize things like partisan value index or specific numbers as to party registration and how party registration would play out? Are those D+5, D+10? Did you use those numbers and discuss them when you made the map?
Number one, we did not, because that's not what the commission was set for. But to be very clear, the Court of Appeals has already rejected a mathematical test for compactness. So if that's something, and they even said, if that's something that the Maryland General Assembly wishes to add, we can do so. So it's not even applicable.
So you guys didn't take into effect what the practical impact of the votes would be, whether a Democrat or Republican would be more likely to win based upon statistical data when you made these maps. You're saying that no one discussed that, no one provided that information, and not a single member of that commission during the process.
Well, I'll be very clear, and I think you know this. The reason we're not doctors is because we're not good at math. So that's
why I went to law school, so we could avoid math.
That's why we both went to law school. So make no mistake, that was never discussed as far as any mathematical equation. Nor was it accepted by the courts.
My last question for you, the precinct data that you used, when was that pulled from? Because you testified before, and you're absolutely right, the concept map that was passed a couple weeks ago would have been prima facie unconstitutional. Correct. Because of the population variations between the districts. So you had to go back for the purposes of this bill and resort the precincts. What year, what month, what time did you use the precinct data to come up with this map to make sure that it's correct now?
Once this bill was presented as a bill and was again had to be zeroed out, that was done by DLS. There was no, to my knowledge, because I did not decide how to zero it out.
So we're not sure if it's precinct data for 2026 or if it's precinct data back from 2022 when the last maps were drawn. That's an open question.
It's an open question.
Thank you. I appreciate it, Madam Chair.
Republican delegate Jason Buckle and Democratic delegate C.T. Wilson testifying at the Maryland House of Delegates committee meeting on the redistricting proposal. CBS News writing that several U.S. states have been pursuing mid-cycle redistricting as Republicans are seeking to maintain their slim majority in Congress. The redistricting effort also comes after President Trump asked Texas Republicans to find more seats. So far, Republicans gained 9 more potential seats and Democrats gained 6, according to the Associated Press. And that was from a CBS News article. This is Washington Today. New York Times writing that Prime Minister Mark Carney of Canada dismissed Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent's suggestion that he had retracted his assertion that President Trump had created an irrevocable rupture to the world order. The Canadian leader spoke to reporters in Ottawa on Tuesday, the day after Mr. Bessent said on Fox News that he was in the Oval Office while Mr. Carney, quote, was very aggressively walking back some of the unfortunate remarks, unquote, he had made at the World Economic Forum in Davos during a telephone call with Mr. Trump, reporting from the New York Times. First, here is the Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent on Fox News Monday. That'll be followed by the Canadian Prime Minister today.
Let's talk about the Prime Minister, or if you prefer, Governor of Canada, and him threatening to, break economic alliances with the U.S., go with China. The president has threatened a 100% tariff. What impact would that have?
It would be a disaster for Canada. I was in the Oval with the president today. He spoke to Prime Minister Carney, who was very aggressively walking back some of the unfortunate remarks he made at Davos. And Sean, I'm not sure what the Prime Minister was thinking. Of course, Canada depends on the U.S. There's much more north-south trade than there could ever be east-west trade. He talks about middle countries having to do their own thing. And I'm old enough to remember when French President Francois Mitterrand tried to go down that route. It failed back in the 80s. It'll fail now. And Canada is linked to the U.S., and the Prime Minister should do what's best for the Canadian people rather than trying to push his own globalist agenda.
Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent on Fox News on Monday. And here is the Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney speaking to reporters in Ottawa today.
Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent says that you walked back your comments on Davos in a conversation with Mr. Trump. Is that the case, Prime Minister?
As I said, first off, the president called me yesterday. We had a very good conversation on a wide range of subjects, ranging from situation in Ukraine, Venezuela, Arctic security. We discussed as well what Canada is doing positively, and this is the context of our discussion, what Canada is doing positively to build new partnerships around the world. I explained to him our arrangement with China. I explained to him what we're doing, 12 new deals on 4 continents in 6 months. He was impressed. And what we intend to do going forward, as well as the opportunity to, of course, move forward on CUSMA. You will note that Minister LeBlanc had discussions with one of his counterparts in the last 36 hours about some of the modalities and things on the way forward. But to be absolutely clear, and I said this to the president, I meant what I said in Davos. It was clear it was a broader set of issues, that Canada was the first country to understand the change in U.S. trade policy that he had initiated, and we're responding to that. We're responding positively by building partnerships abroad. We're responding positively by building at home, and we're prepared to respond positively by building that new relationship through CUSMA. He understood that, and it was a good conversation, as I said.
So you didn't walk back your comments?
Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney speaking to reporters today in Ottawa. More from the New York Times article. Mr. Carney arrived in Switzerland after striking a trade deal with China that will allow a small number of Chinese electric vehicles to enter Canada at a low tariff rate. During the Biden administration, Canada joined the United States and imposed a 100% tariff on Chinese EVs. Initially, Mr. Trump seemed to bless Mr. Carney's agreement with China, saying that's okay, that's what he should be doing. But later on social media, he threatened to impose a 100% tariff on Canadian exports, quote, if Canada makes a deal with China. The New York Times article says Mr. Carney has repeatedly said that Canada has no plans to seek a broader free trade deal with China. The Council on Foreign Relations held a discussion today titled China and Congress, Is There Still a Bipartisan Consensus? With two U.S. senators, Republican Pete Ricketts of Nebraska and Democrat Chris Coons of Delaware. During the question and answer period, they were asked by Jane Harman, former Democratic congresswoman from California, now president and CEO of the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars, about the future of Taiwan.
You said, Senator Ricketts, that listen to autocrats, they do what they say. If Xi Jinping might have 2027 on his calendar, that's next year, do you think there's a chance that he might accelerate that, given the disarray in our country for a variety of reasons, especially on the foreign policy side, but also the roundup of immigrants, et cetera, et cetera? And if he did that, are we really prepared to respond? I would venture to say that 50% of Americans have no idea where Taiwan is on a map. And even though you two are great ambassadors, and I would give you U.S. foreign policy tomorrow if I could, do you think that this administration is ready? And do you think the Congress could really offer some huge assist to some action to respond?
I think it's unlikely that Xi Jinping is going to try to accelerate his plans, just because it is very, very difficult. And he just sacked his top general. Now, we were talking about this ahead of time. Jean either got sacked because he wasn't making enough progress toward the goal of getting the PLA ready to take Taiwan by 2027, or maybe it was more along the lines of questioning his loyalty. So there's a couple different theories out there, could be, but I think it's unlikely that he's going to try to move that quickly to be able to do that. Now, to your second part of the question, are we ready? And we need to do a lot more to get ready. And that's, again, part of what Chris and I are doing. So things like the Porcupine Act would make Taiwan a NATO plus country for 7 years. That would reduce things like congressional notification time, take the dollar threshold up of the weapons we can send them. The Trump administration just announced $11 billion going to Taiwan. So we need to, one of the things that we need to do, and we heard this when we were over there, is we got to clear up this backlog and this what's gumming up the system just to get the weapons to them. So they've purchased a lot of billions of dollars from us. We got to deliver it. We haven't been doing that. We got to do that. So there's absolutely a lot more that we have to do to be able to deter Communist China from doing this. And here's the one thing we also need to think about too, and why this is important. Xi Jinping wants Taiwan as part of his legacy, right? This is going back to really getting back to the height of the Chinese empire back in the 1600s. This is what he sees as his legacy. So this is super important for him. He has pretty much made it clear he is going to be dictator there for life. So is he going to be here for the next 10 years? Yeah. 15, maybe 20 years? Starting to get up there in age. You know, he'd be 92 or whatever. So he's got some time to think about this, but he really, really wants this, right? But here's the other thing he knows. If he tries this and fails, he will not get to keep his job and maybe not his life, right? As a dictator, you don't get to retire to the country, right? You get killed in office or you die in office. So that's what he's always going to be thinking about, is he's got to be really pretty sure he's going to be successful with this, because if he fails, it's going to be really, really bad for him personally. So that's part of why we do have, I think, some time to be able to do this, but we got to take all the right steps, and we do need to do much more to prepare.
I do think that we lack the sense of urgency that is required for this moment. The national security strategy seems to significantly downgrade the sense of focus and prioritization on the PRC and its regional projection of power. And we've seen just this year some of the most aggressive, most sustained deployments around Taiwan, crossing the center line. When I was in Australia this August, they were briefing us on how a Chinese naval flotilla circumnavigated Australia and carried out drills targeting every major city of Australia. You know better than I. In the South China Sea and throughout the region, China has become exceptionally assertive and aggressive. As the senior Democrat on intelligence and defense appropriations, I worked well with Senator McConnell in making sure that we are prioritizing a whole range of issues, from submarine construction to ship construction to long-range fires to a number of other important programs you're aware of. But bluntly, we're not moving fast enough. Our defense industrial base and our procurement process is sclerotic. It is not acquiring and deploying cutting-edge capabilities at the scale and speed we require. There are some encouraging developments. For example, the delegation I led over August got to visit the Ghost Shark project led by Anduril in Australia. There are some green shoots, but not on the timeline that I think we need. And I do think some of the recent decisions in the American military, the abrupt sacking of C.Q. Brown and of Lisa Franchetti, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, the chief of naval operations, also sends a signal about continuity of leadership and about professionalism in our military. We need the same sort of seriousness across the Congress that Senator Ricketts has brought to this work, and we need the same sort of focus on a bipartisan and disciplined sustainment of this mission in order for us to succeed. And I agree with Senator Ricketts, with Pete, that this is the role of the Senate, to say, regardless of, today Venezuela, tomorrow Greenland, this is something that really matters to us and to our children. And I agree with your strategic analysis that for Xi Jinping, this is the most important thing he can accomplish. We want to maintain the status quo, and we want to maintain the American role as a Pacific power and as a country that helps through our network of alliances to reinforce the importance of freedom in the Indo-Pacific.
Senator Chris Coons, Democrat of Delaware, sitting beside Senator Pete Ricketts, Republican of Nebraska, at the Council on Foreign Relations in Washington, D.C. today. And the title of the discussion, China and Congress, is there still a bipartisan consensus? Kyoto News from Japan reports that Japan on Tuesday faced its first period without any giant pandas in over half a century, with the departure of the last two from a Tokyo zoo, as China continues to use panda loans as a diplomatic tool in its relations with other countries, amid a deterioration in Sino-Japanese ties following Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi's remarks in Parliament in November suggesting Japan could act in the event of an attack on Taiwan, a self-ruled democratic island claimed by China. Beijing has suggested it will not make a fresh panda loan to the neighboring country. That was from Kyoto News. From Reuters, atomic scientists set their doomsday clock on Tuesday closer than ever to midnight, citing aggressive behavior by nuclear powers Russia, China, and the United States, fraying nuclear arms control, conflicts in Ukraine and the Middle East, and AI worries among factors driving risks for global disaster. The bulletin of the atomic scientists set the clock at 85 seconds before midnight, the theoretical point of annihilation that is 4 seconds closer than it was set last year. The Chicago-based nonprofit created the clock in 1947 during the Cold War tensions that followed World War II to warn the public about how close humankind was to destroying the world. That's the article from Reuters. Here is President and CEO of the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists at today's news conference.
My name is Alexandra Bell, and I am the President and CEO of the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists. It is the determination of the Bulletin's Science and Security Board that humanity has not made sufficient progress on the existential risks that endanger us all. We thus move the clock forward. The doomsday clock is a tool for communicating how close we are to destroying the world with technologies of our own making. The risks we face from nuclear weapons, climate change, and disruptive technologies are all growing. Every second counts, and we are running out of time. It is a hard truth, but this is our reality. It is now 85 seconds to midnight. This is the closest the world has ever been to midnight.
At this point in the news conference, they unveiled the new clock, and then some remarks from Daniel Holtz, chair of the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists Science and Security Board. He's also a physics professor.
The doomsday clock is now at 85 seconds to midnight, the closest it has been in the history of the clock. Last year, we warned that the world was perilously close to catastrophe and that countries needed to change course towards international cooperation and action on the most critical existential risks. Unfortunately, the opposite has happened. Rather than heed this warning, major countries became even more aggressive, adversarial, and nationalistic. Conflicts intensified in 2025, with multiple military operations involving nuclear-armed states. The last remaining treaty governing nuclear weapon stockpiles between the U.S. and Russia expires next week. For the first time in over half a century, there will be nothing preventing a runaway nuclear arms race. On climate change, the assault on the environment has, if anything, escalated. Atmospheric carbon dioxide and global sea levels have reached record highs. Droughts, fires, floods, and storms continue to intensify and become more erratic, and this will only get worse. Grave dangers persist in the life sciences, particularly in emerging areas such as the development of synthetic mirror life. Despite repeated warnings from scientists worldwide, the international community has no coordinated plan, and the world remains unprepared for potentially devastating biological threats. AI is a significant and accelerating disruptive technology. AI is also supercharging mis- and disinformation, which makes it even more difficult to address all of the other threats we consider. But instead of working towards international standards governing AI safety, we are running headlong into an AI arms race with what could be dire consequences. We're also concerned about the increasing rise of nationalistic autocracies. If the world splinters into an us versus them, zero-sum approach, it increases the likelihood that we all lose. These autocratic trends impede international cooperation, reduce accountability, and serve as a threat multiplier, making it even less likely that the world will address the existential threats at its doorstep. We note with alarm the recent tragedies in Minnesota and the erosion of the constitutional rights of American citizens. History has shown that when governments become unaccountable to their own citizens, conflict and misery follow. This global trend makes the world more dangerous for everyone. For all of these reasons, we move the clock forward. Our leaders need to do better. We need to do better.
Daniel Holtz, chair of the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists Science and Security Board, also a physics professor at the University of Chicago, at today's announcement of the new setting for the doomsday clock. Senator Ed Markey, Democrat of Massachusetts, writing on X, the doomsday clock now stands at 85 seconds to midnight, the closest it has ever been. When the New START treaty expires next week, there will be nothing stopping a new nuclear arms race. Trump and Putin could agree today to stick with New START limits. We can turn back the clock. That post from Senator Ed Markey. The doomsday clock was created in 1947 with an initial setting of 7 minutes to midnight. Furthest away it has ever been was 1991 after the Cold War ended, 17 minutes to midnight. Associated Press writing that Holocaust survivors, politicians, and regular people commemorated International Holocaust Remembrance Day on Tuesday, gathering at events held across Europe to reflect on Nazi Germany's murder of millions of people and its attempts to annihilate European Jewry. International Holocaust Remembrance Day is observed across the world on January 27th, the anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau, the most notorious of the Nazi German death camps. The United Nations General Assembly adopted a resolution in 2005 establishing the day as an annual commemoration. That was from Associated Press. And today, the United Nations held a ceremony at the UN office in Geneva, officially titled International Day of Commemoration in Memory of the Victims of the Holocaust. United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres delivered remarks by video.
Today, we honor the memory of the victims of the Holocaust with solemn reflection and unwavering resolve. We mourn the 6 million Jews murdered by the Nazis and their collaborators, as well as the Roma and Sinti, the people with disabilities, and countless others who perished. Each victim had a name. Each victim had hopes and dreams. And each of those victims had their rights systematically denied and destroyed. When we remember these undisputable truths, we remember their humanity. We grieve for all that was lost and all that might have been. The Holocaust was not inevitable. Its architects made their intentions clear. Their hatred and violence unfolded in plain sight. The facts are undeniable. Yet today we see the forces of distortion and denial on the march. Anti-Semitism, bigotry, racism and discrimination are being fueled by dehumanizing rhetoric and enabled by indifference. We must take a stand to honor past victims and prevent further atrocities. We must renounce hatred and injustice wherever they appear. We must defend the right of every person to live free from fear, indignity and peace. This is the foundation of the United Nations. On this day and every day, let us honor the memory of the victims of the Holocaust by reaffirming our shared humanity, upholding human dignity, and defending the values that unite us all.
United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres in a video played at the UN office in Geneva's ceremony today on International Holocaust Remembrance Day. Many members of the U.S. House and Senate marking this day on X. Senator Katie Britt, Republican from Alabama, writing, "On Holocaust Remembrance Day, we honor the victims and survivors and remember the 6 million Jews murdered in the Holocaust. We reflect on the devastating consequences of anti-Semitism and hatred. We must never forget, and we must never allow history to repeat itself." And from Congressman Derek Tran, Democrat of California, International Holocaust Remembrance Day is a profoundly solemn reminder of the 6 million Jewish lives stolen by the Nazi regime during the Holocaust. But it's also a call to action to reject anti-Semitism, stand up against hate, and ensure that the horrors of the Holocaust are never repeated. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Remember, for the latest on what's been going on in Washington, you can sign up for C-SPAN's evening newsletter word for word at cspan.org. Hope you have a good night.